William R. Bennett Bridge, a pontoon bridge that crosses the Okanagan Lake, connecting downtown Kelowna to West Kelowna on Highway 97. Completed in 2008, it was named in honor of former Premier Bill Bennett, who was born there. With the arrival of the first European settlers in Kelowna in 1859, the area began to grow with the realization that the land was ideal for its fruit growing. As orchards began operations on either side of the Okanagan Lake, transporting the goods from West Bank to Kelowna was required to get produce to buyers. Around 1885, two locals, the McDougall brothers, launched a service with a leaky scow to accomplish this. They would load your gear on horses on the scow, then get you to help them row to the other side. Several years later, Len Heyman launched a little steamer called the Tut Tut that carried a horse and a couple of passengers a couple times a day, weather permitting. In 1905, when Kelowna became a city with a population of 600, Len Heyman and H.B. Lyons were awarded a government contract to operate a ferry service from Kelowna to the west side of the lake. They launched the steamboat Skookum and a 40-foot barge for this service. It began April 1st, 1906, with 2 round trips a day for 25 cents a passenger and $1 for a horse. The ferry ran from the foot of Queensway Avenue in Kelowna, where the visitor center now sits, to the end of Old Ferry Wharf Road, where you can still see what used to be the launch site. In the fall of 1907, Heyman had a little steamboat built. She was named Clovely and ran until 1911. Heyman had an offer to sell and passed the boat to Ed Hankinson. Hankinson had poor service and lost his contract due to complaints, and it was passed to J.Y. Campbell, who ran it until 1916. During this time, Campbell launched Aricia, a 50-foot gas launch. Heyman bought her and the contract in 1916. 5 years later, he built a barge to carry 8 cars. Each year, the automobile traffic increased, to the point where the provincial government took over service on February 21, 1927, and launched a car ferry named the Kelowna West Bank. The wooden hull motor vessel was 94 feet long and 32 feet at the beam. She was 104 tons and carried 15 cars. Traffic steadily increased as the area developed, and during the cold winters of the 1930s, she was often unable to provide service. In addition, her wooden hull had begun to deteriorate, and she was nicknamed MV Holdup. She worked until 1939, when dry rot caused her to be taken out of service and dismantled. The next vessel was the MV Pandozzi, named after the first settler of Kelowna, Father Pandozzi. At 122 feet long, she was driven by 260 horsepower diesel engines. The ferry had a capacity of 30 cars and 150 passengers. It was launched Thursday, May 8, 1939. The fare was 10 cents a passenger and 75 cents for a car and driver. Trucks were $1 and up. Ferry traffic continued to increase, and in May 1946, tenders were called for a second vessel similar to the Pandozzi. This vessel was called Lequim, in honor of Kelowna's early settler, Eli Lequim. Both ferries operated during peak traffic times, and refitting was accomplished by laying one vessel up during the winter. As Kelowna continued to grow, so did the traffic volume. A third vessel, named Lloyd Jones, was built in 1950, and all 3 vessels were used during heavy traffic seasons. With the continued growth of southern Okanagan and the completion of the Hope-Princeton Highway in 1949, traffic at the ferry terminals increased by 300%, and trying to get across the lake became much more difficult. The need for a bridge crossing was important for the continued growth of the region. Initially, designers created plans for a suspension bridge, but that was ruled out due to its depth of up to 260 meters and the very soft sediments on the bottom of the lake, so designers turned to a floating bridge, the first of its kind in Canada. Construction on the Okanagan Lake Bridge began in 1956 by Dominion Bridge and Kelowna Bridge Contracting, and was made up of 12 reinforced concrete pontoons totaling 700 meters in length, 15 meters wide, and 5 meters in depth. each bolted together to form a continuous rigid unit. The pontoons were supported laterally, with 12 pairs of anchors set up to 200 meters either side of the bridge, and each weighing 64 tons and set 8 meters into the lake bed. The anchors would be adjusted to compensate for changes in the lake water level from 1 to 2 meters throughout the year. A lift span that was 85 meters long, with twin towers measuring 30 meters high, was constructed at the east end of the structure to allow passage of marine traffic under the bridge. The lift span sat on approximately 700 piles driven into the lake bottom. At the time of completion, it was the longest floating bridge in the world, built at a cost of $7.5 million. On July 19, 1958, the bridge opened with 2 lanes of traffic. Princess Margaret, along with Premier William Andrew Cecil Bennett, dedicated the bridge in a ceremony attended by 30,000 people. Tolls were introduced to help pay for the bridge construction and upkeep. The cost was 50 cents per crossing for most vehicles and up to $2 for large trucks. These tolls were removed as part of British Columbia's Toll Removal Act on April 1, 1963. The bridge brought increased traffic from further distances, including the USA. The growth of Kelowna began to take off, shifting from a quiet lakeside town to a bustling center that would ultimately become the most populated city in the interior of British Columbia. With the opening of the Okanagan Lake Bridge, the ferry service became redundant and ceased operations on July 20, 1958, having carried over 500,000 vehicles in the final year. All 3 ferries found new life with the opening of the bridge. The MV Pendozzi was turned over to the city of Kelowna, who later sold it as the clubhouse for the West Kelowna Yacht Club. The MV Laquim was transferred into the Fintry Queen, a tourist boat traveling the lake. Today she sits in limbo, waiting for moorage. The MV Lloyd Jones, transferred to the coast in the early 1960s, was put into service for BC Ferries as the Bowen Queen and renamed the Vesuvius Queen in 1965, serving many of the minor routes until she was sold to the Dominican Republic in 1998. 25 years after the bridge's completion in 1983, it had exceeded its maximum vehicle capacity. The limitations were addressed through the reconfiguration of the deck to accommodate 3 lanes, introducing a center counterflow lane that provided 2 lanes flow in peak directions. With this upgrade, the bridge was designed to handle 38,000 vehicles per day. However, over the next couple of decades of operation, traffic was exceeding 50,000 vehicles per day. In 2003, the BC government approved the building of a new bridge at an estimated cost of $100 million and another $20 million for 2 interchange upgrades on the west side of the lake. By the time construction began in June of 2005, the cost of the bridge was increased to $144 million due to the dramatic increases in the cost of construction materials and labor, which included significant increases in the cost of concrete, steel, and fuel. SNC-Lavalin was chosen to design, build, finance, and operate the new bridge, as well as a 30-year contract to maintain it through its subsidiary ProTrans WRB Bridge, bringing the total to $179 million. The bridge pontoons were built at a dry dock on the beach beside Bear Creek Provincial Campground. Once the pontoons were built, they were floated down the lake and put into place alongside the old bridge. Extending 1,060 meters in total length, the bridge includes a 690-meter string of floating pontoons supporting an elevated deck. There are 2 54-meter transition spans and a fixed west approach structure. At 277 meters long, it includes an elevated span to allow for an 18-meter high by 44-meter wide marine passage. The transition spans allow for movement of the floating structure while maintaining the rideability of the roadway surface. Since the lake fluctuates by several meters every year, the transition span also had to be long enough to prevent steep grade changes in the roadway. As a new pontoon was floated into place beside the existing bridge, 1 or 2 anchor cables on the north side of the bridge were disconnected and attached to the north side of the new pontoon. Once the new 690-meter pontoon string was completed, the pontoon section from the original bridge were disconnected, along with their submerged weights. Then the south anchor cables were lengthened and connected to the new bridge. These massive concrete pontoons are not exactly hollow. They are more like a honeycomb inside. There's a network of interior walls so that if, let's say, a tugboat or even the Ogopogo rams into the side and water starts going in, only a small compartment fills up. It wouldn't change how the bridge floats. There are 828 compartments, so one compartment is a very small percentage of the total buoyancy. Construction of the $144 million crossing was completed between August 2005 and February 2009, 108 days ahead of schedule. With 2 lanes eastbound and 3 lanes westbound, the bridge is designed to handle up to 80,000 vehicles per day. Currently, averaging just over 69,000 vehicles per day, the bridge will continue to serve the central Okanagan for years to come. Plans for a second crossing of the Okanagan Lake have been proposed. However, due to the current demand not quite at its peak, those plans have been shelved for now.